Hey everybody, Jason here. Before we get started with the episode proper, which is episode 149 of Every Night is Game Night, featuring Rob Daviau talking about Return to Dark Tower and a couple of other games, wanted to give a quick shout out. So Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire has become a very, very good friend of mine, and she contributes to the Kickstarter segment every single week. That segment will not be occurring this week because we are featuring Dark Tower. However, I'm really excited to announce that starting this Sunday will be July 28th. By the time this episode posts, you might be listening to it afterwards. But by July 28th, Liz is going to be debuting as a video reviewer for the Dice Tower. A very, very prominent spot, lots and lots of exposure, and she is going to be covering the games that we enjoy here in the solo community. We're talking Universe type games, we're talking Friday, we're talking Mage Knight, Robinson Crusoe, all those top 10 games that we personally love. She is going to give a very specific platform to, which is a very, very exciting thing. So her first video, which is on the 28th of July, we're posting this on the 26th, so a couple of days out from when we post. She'll be featuring Renegade by Ricky Royal. That game is loved by the solo community, but hasn't gotten a lot of penetration in the kind of wider gaming universe. So I think this is a really, really great thing. Happy for Ricky, happy for Liz, to be able to get on the Dice Tower and start really, really taking this to the next level in terms of exposure for the games that we all love. So go ahead, give some love to Liz. Shout out to you. And that's basically it. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, your home for heavy strategy, awesome theme, and everything in between. Check us out along with other great podcasts at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 149. Designer Roundtable on storytelling and games, old and new. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a full house this week. It is another designer roundtable. You guys know how much I love inviting over very, very smart people, smarter than me when it comes to this game design stuff, and having a chat about a topic of interest to me and hopefully everybody else. So today we're going to be talking storytelling in games old and new. And the reason why I wanted to do it in this particular way is because we have a very esteemed guest, a first time appearance on the podcast. He is a designer. He knows a lot about old school design, new school design, all sorts of design. He's just, been in the area a lot of years, doing a lot of things. Started off, I believe, at Hasbro. And he did Risk Legacy, which is one of the things that we really enjoyed, coming off the gate. He's done, re-themes of Monopoly, all sorts of good stuff. He is currently at Restoration Games. There will be a new project coming out called Return to Dark Tower, and a couple of other projects that he might be sharing about. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Rob Daviau. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
All right. And helping me out is the two gentlemen from the One-Stop Coop Shop. These two gentlemen are game designers. They have designed Salvation Road, and they have a couple of other designs down the pike, and they host their own podcast about cooperative games. Here are Peter Goosis and Michael Kelly. Welcome back to the show, guys.
Hey, I'm Peter, and I'm here with Mike.
Hey, yeah, this is not our podcast, Peter, though. We don't do our intro here.
Well, I had to rush it in because I knew I had to get in before Mike, because I don't have a snappy, hello line like Jason does. So that's it for me. That's my one claim to fame.
Peter will never talk again on the podcast.
That really bothered you. You need just do it. Just spend a weekend, go to a cabin and come up with a snazzy intro line.
Is that where you figured yours out, Jason? You were in a cabinet? Did you go in and close the door and pretend you were in Narnia and just imagine that great ideas were coming to you? Because I know that's where Rob came up with the legacy concept, right? Just in a cabinet somewhere.
Yep, that's pretty much it.
Just sitting there meditating on life. I actually came up with it on a subway. Just meditating to myself was like, oh man, that'll be good. That'll be good if I ever had my own radio show. That's how I'm going to do myself.
And then you just put that away, and now your dream has come true today.
It's legitimately exactly how it came up. As
that's
a
great.
visit of New York City, a lot of thinking gets done. I think Lin-Manuel wrote half the songs of Hamilton on the train.
That's probably true, yeah.
I feel it's comparable to being in a cabinet, so you're good.
Sometimes, absolutely.
But yes, with all the silliest away, Jason, thanks so much for having us on the podcast. And Rob, it's an honor to be on here with you talking about storytelling in games.
Thank you very much. I love games that tell a story. I mean, I'm not Ignacy, so that's not my tagline. But yeah, if there's theme and there's a narrative and there's characters, and later on I'm talking about it, and people go, "What are you talking about?" And I go, "A board game." Oh, I thought you were talking about a movie or a TV show. Those are the games I want to make and the games I like playing. Well, the primary ones. I like playing lots of games.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, yes, we are going to talk games that tell stories. I don't think he has that copyright. I think it's just like a thing he says and it's just kind of his. So I'm using it. I think a lot of people use it, games that tell stories.
I don't know if he has a copy. It's his thing. He says it enough that he's made it his thing. So
absolutely.
Good for him.
He planted his flag.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get to that broader topic, Rob is here to talk about a very special project, which I mentioned in the intro. It is being play tested right now. It's being play tested while we're recording. It's being looked at Dice Tower Con, and there will be more stuff about it. Gen Con should be in a couple of weeks after this episode airs. So we are going to talk about it because I'm really excited about it. This will be the Kickstarter segment for the week. We don't know a date yet, so just want to be very, very careful about that. More information will be forthcoming. But Return to Dark Tower was announced last year, I believe. Isaac Childress is kind of driving the design and in collaboration with Rob and a couple of others. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know, restoration games, our bit is we take old games out of print and we restore them. So we do a reboot. And sometimes it's just a light polish, and sometimes, like Return to Dark Tower, it's a pretty big reboot. We're like the J.J. Abrams of board games. So it's not a reprint necessarily. So we go and we say, why was this game fun or great or cool? Why do we like it in the time it was? And then we say, if someone pitched us this exact game today, when we like the idea, how we go, okay, that's great, but we need to change some things to modernize it or tweak it or make it fit our audience. And then we sort of rebuild the game from there. So Isaac and I are co-designing this along with Justin Jacobson, my partner at the company, is doing some design work, and we have a developer as well, and a lot of playtesters. And it has been and continues to be a very big project. It is like the biggest project I've ever worked on, and I've been doing this 21 years, I guess. Mm-hmm. So, did any of you play the original game? Or you're all too young for it? It was 1981.
I was born with the original game, but no, I've not played it.
Like literally, you were born and there was the copy of the game with you, which is impressive.
Yes, yeah. It was keeping me company in my crib.
Yeah.
That explains a lot. I haven't played it either, though.
I'm like outing myself. We're all outing our ages. I was born in 1977. I was playing games in the 1980s, and I remember there was a cluster of games actually that were kind of fantasy. This is like satanic stuff. You're not supposed to play this. Like I think Nightmare, like Atmosphere. I think it's called.
Atmosphere was one. We wanted to restore that, but someone else is doing a reprint. We just missed it. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so someone is bringing that back because that game was horrific but good. And Dark Tower was the same way. Dark Tower. We should probably. Well, actually, you can probably get into it. Like explain like what it is, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, it was. So 1981 when it came out was really the height of the Dungeons and Dragons craze in the U.S. Although it's very popular now, but that was it. That was when everyone was 81, 82, and 83. Everyone was playing D&D, even the people who didn't hear about it before and would immediately stop playing it by like 84. It was a pop culture thing, and there was a cartoon on TV. So anything that was fantasy-based was selling really hot.
It was Tom Hanks' debut movie was Mazes and Monsters.
Mazes and Monsters. I don't know what year that was. That was sort of 85 or 86. That was the backlash where D&D was, it's a cult and, you're really casting spells. This is when it was still, all right, kids are getting together and reading. This is good. So Milton Bradley put out this game called Dark Tower, and it had a round board and it had a big plastic tower in the middle. It's about, I forget if it's 10 or 12 inches tall, and it had these buttons you pushed, and it had this basically like a slideshow on a wheel. It had 3 lights in it, like stop lights, and then these drums that would turn around, and it would light up a light, and depending on what drum was in front, would show brigands or a dragon, or that you're lost, or that you're at the bazaar, or the bazaar is closed, or you found a key. And it was 4-player or up to 4-player. I think it might have played even 1-player, which was revolutionary at the time. And
it played 1-player.
Yeah, it was solitaire. Like each person just started in their kingdom and went counterclockwise around this circular board and tried to get a brass, silver, and gold key from each kingdom, and then come back and storm the tower with your warriors. And you had to manage warriors, and then food for your warriors, and then you had gold to buy things. And you had to decide, like, do I want a diversion to the bazaar to buy things that might protect me later? Do I just want to forge ahead? Oh, I need to get some food. Do I have enough food to get to the next place? If I get lost, I might not have enough food. And I think if people played it now and you can buy it, you can get it on any sort of smartphone. There's an app and you can play. You'd be like, what? Why was this such a thing? Because it had this electronic tower that did everything, which in 1981 was revolutionary. Like, it rolled dice for you. It knew how much food you had. It knew what keys you had found. It knew what kingdom you were in. It knew how many warriors you had. And this was just mind-blowing. It was rolling dice and drawing event cards and all of these things and playing sounds, and there was motors and things turned, and it was just sort of cutting edge at the time, and it just took off. And it was, I think it was $80 in 1981, which is like $250 now.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
holy cow.
And Orson Welles did a TV commercial. It was crazy. So it came out, and then there was a lawsuit. And these inventors who had pitched a different idea to Milton Bradley said, hey, this looks like it's based on our idea. And then they lost, and they won on appeal, and then there was money, and then they'd put so much money paying Orson Welles that with the lawsuit, like, it all became a mess, and they just stopped publishing it. So it was really popular, and then it went away because of outside things. So then it made it rare. And so it has lived in sort of this cultural memory as this amazing moment in gaming history, which it was. And we just kept getting requests for it. So we spent a couple years untangling the rights and figuring it out, and then sat down to rebuild it. And that's what Isaac and I and the rest of the team have been doing since, 2.5 years now, something like that. And it has not been easy, but we're getting there.
There was also like this push your luck type aspect to it, wasn't there? Where, like, if you're at the bazaar, you could either, kind of keep going and then fail, or, certain attacks were like that.
There were 2 ways that you could press your luck. You could haggle at the bazaar.
Yeah.
And the bazaar would either close or they'd lower prices. And I think if they lowered their prices, you could try again. I think after 3 times, they'd automatically close. But you could push your luck. And the other thing was, and it was really cool, I don't even know I haven't done the math if it's good game design, but it's good narrative design, is in combat. Whenever you lost a round of combat, you would lose a warrior. But whenever the brigands, who are the people you always fought, would lose, they would lose half.
Right.
So if you started and you had 20 and they had 40, and then you'd go 19, 18, 17, and then they'd go down to 20. And it'd be like 16, 15, and because you could retreat at any moment, 15, and then they go down to 10. And then you might lose 7 rows. They had this thing where I think the player would lose like 5 out of 6 times. So you would see yourself trickle down, and then they would suddenly jump down and go to half. And it was this really sort of interesting feeling, because even if you were down to 8 and they had, 20, you thought, okay, if they just lose twice, it'll be 8-5. And so it created a lot of tension for the player watching. And unfortunately, it didn't create much tension for the other people who just heard it beeping. And, because the screen was faced away, and they were wondering, they knew you were in combat, and they knew you weren't pushing the button. So then they could see on your face. And it was 1981. We didn't mind that. And there was a little bit of interest from hearing what was going on. But yeah, it was, those were the areas where you sort of had control over how much risk you wanted to take.
I definitely want to get back to that comment of like, oh, it was 1981. I really want to get back to that. But just to kind of put a point on what Return to Dark Tower is going to be. So you're taking all that was in the tower and putting that, I guess, into an app?
Well, that was a design challenge that we had. That was the first one we thought as well. We're not just gonna make it count and do these things that were great in 1981 because they wouldn't be great now. But we thought, well, we're also not going to put all these electronics and circuits and screens and everything into a tower because you have a phone. So we're like, well, we'll just put it into an app and then we'll put the phone in the tower. You could put maybe 4 phones to all this stuff. And then very quickly you realize you don't need the tower. Just leave it off and hold your phone in your hand. It's going to be easier to use. And then there's no dark tower. You're playing dark phone, right? And so we spent some time thinking that would be no problem and then went, well, that's kind of a big problem. We realized there has to be some sort of electronics guiding it, which are in an app, which you hold or the player, and then, or it's in front of you. And we needed a game board with all the pieces, and then we needed a tower. And these 3 things had to work together. So if the tower wasn't doing electronics, what was it doing? And the answer to that, unfortunately, I'm going to talk a little bit around because we're revealing it at Gen Con, and I'm not going to step on our own surprise. But it's more mechanical than electronic. It does have doors that open, and it's got lights, and it's got motors, and it's got a whole bunch of things. And the thing that I really like is, and hopefully we have a working copy at Gen Con, it's going to have a Bluetooth module that will talk to the phone. So the phone will know what the tower's doing, and the tower will know what the phone knows and the state of the game. There's some things that'll be blind to both of them, like where you are on the board. We did look at things like camera scanning the board and smart boards so it knew where players were, and magnets and moving things and all sorts of stuff that didn't work out either because they were too expensive or they were just a gimmick that weren't that fun, or both. And so it took us about a year to figure out what the tower was going to do. At some point we thought, the tower will start as rubble and then it'll grow back into being a tower. And if it grows all the way, you lose. So it's sort of coming back to life like this, golem, like this pile of rubble. Engineering-wise, within reasonable cost parameters, we couldn't get that to work without it looking like a birthday cake slowly coming to life.
Beautiful.
Okay, all right. So, just to bring Peter and Mike into the discussion, you guys didn't play Dark Tower, but you guys both played kind of fantasy-ish games. I know Michael in particular. You're a D&D guy growing up, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So, was that your main kind of storytelling gaming experience? Was D&D, or did you have other things you get either in the board gaming space or otherwise?
So, I was a big choose-your-own-adventure person as well, and that's definitely going to kind of come into the storytelling discussion as we go along. And beyond just the actual choose-your-own-adventure series, one of my favorites was the Lone Wolf series. Did any of you all play that Joe Deaver wrote?
I did not play that one. I think the difference in our age is, this would have been the late 80s, early 90s.
Lone Wolf started in the mid-80s, I think, like 1984, 85, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's when I was getting too cool for games for 5 years. Right, I was in high school and driving around and had a girlfriend. So anything from like the mid to late 80s, I was like, nah. And then in the 90s, I'm like, wow, I really like D&D in games. What am I doing?
I think we all had that phase. So I think Lone Wolf kind of came out of the fighting fantasy books, but yeah, a lot of I didn't play D&D as a kid as much as I wanted to play D&D. And like the World of Darkness RPGs and all that kind of stuff. I was the kid who was going into RPG stores and game stores and just like sitting down with source books and geeking out with them and bringing them home and geeking out with them more, and then maybe once in a year playing with some of my group of friends, and either it loses steam or they didn't enjoy it or whatever. So, but yes, I would say, and then board game wise, Hero Quest was a big one. Mm-hmm. With both like kind of a fantasy storyline and also the fact that you could create your own adventures. Like they had like this blank section in the game book where you could like create your own quests. And then also just video games. I mean, I think honestly probably the strongest stories I was getting were from video games like JRPGs and that kind of thing, Japanese role-playing games. That's where a lot of my background lay in when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Peter?
Yeah, so my gaming consisted of me not being cool enough for the local D&D group. So I tried to play with them, but I was just all about getting magic weapons. I'm like, do I get a magic weapon? Do I get a magic weapon this time? And I think after a while, they just like, all right, we're not inviting that kid back because all he wants is to min-max and power up. But most of my gaming as a kid was actually, I agree with Mike, I did the Lone Wolf series of books. I did a lot of Choose Your Own Adventures. I did love that. But a lot of my gaming as a kid was cards, Yahtzee, and backgammon, chess. So, I mean, that was a lot of my gaming as a child. I got into Magic in the 90s, right when it first came out. And then, I always did some miniature gaming as well in the background. So I have that in my background. So I'm going to have a lot to contribute to this conversation today since I didn't play any story games as a kid.
Well, you can talk about the modern side of things.
Yeah, and I think, like you were saying before about how, because we were talking before, Michael played a game, I think you guys are going to review it, called Escape the Dark Castle, where it had that really, really old school kind of vibe and mechanisms and everything and how you enjoy it. So we'll get into that in a second. I do want to get back to what Rob was saying about how there's like stuff we'll tolerate in 1981, or we did tolerate in 1981 that we just won't tolerate now. Maybe you could tell me a little bit more, or tell us a little bit more about what you're talking about there. I mean, are you talking about from a game experience perspective, from a narrative perspective, or how does that, what goes into that statement? Like, there's stuff we'll tolerate in 1981 that we don't tolerate now.
Oh, it's mostly, we have gotten in all parts of pop culture allergic to downtime. Right, our paces just increase and increase. If you watch a movie from the 70s or 80s, everything just takes its time. There's quiet moments, right? You look at it and you say that movie would be 20 minutes shorter. Now it would be cut faster. Things would happen faster. I watched a Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I watched a couple episodes from the pilot season 2 or 3 months ago, and I went, wow, that's not how TV looks anymore. It just takes its time a little more. Same thing with board games. You could have elimination, and you're like, well, you're out. We're going to keep playing for 45 minutes.
Play something else.
And I can make an argument that that's not necessarily bad between some modern games, which is you're not going to win, but sit here and take your turn for 45 minutes. And because if you leave, we can't keep playing. And then you're just moving pieces so other people can win. I just think that, playing a game where 3/4 of the time you're looking at the back of a tower and listening to it would not go over well now.
I mean, it's funny you say those things because Mike and I, whenever we get together, we're like, all right, how do we make this more simultaneous? How do we integrate the turns more? I mean, that's one of our key design constraints that we always try to do. I mean, we're trying to make most of our games simultaneous now, just so there's no downtime. So it's funny you say that. I totally hear you.
Yeah, and I think in general it's a better way to play games. I mean, I think that a lot of the games up until almost the beginning of this century were just based on some older style of games and mindsets, that where you had downtime and you pondered your turn and leisure time was different. I mean, I'm not going to end up doing some sort of book report or thesis on leisure time and games, but I just think that our tastes have changed, I think, largely for the better. Like everything else, it can be overdone. I personally am not a fan of real-time games. It's like, there's no turns at all, just go. And I'm like, but I want a turn. Like, I play board games because I want a little structure. Oh, it's my turn? Okay, I'm going to take my turn. Just wait a second. It'll be fast, but I'm going to do it. Not, I have other forms of entertainment. Like, I can go play soccer or something, or ultimate frisbee, or there's some sort of sport and just run around and get that simultaneous experience. Other people like it. So, but I think in general, yeah, I totally agree. When I'm playing a game now, I'm like, what's the downtime? How long until my turn? What can I be doing to prepare for my turn? What can I be doing so that when it is my turn, I don't have a lot of new board information? And so everyone has to wait for me to process this new information. It's just the way we design games now.
So then, and this is exactly kind of, a lot of times, because I've done a lot of these, designer roundtables. I've done ones in solo variants, different designers coming on. I've done one on fantasy themes. I usually kind of have a thing in mind, kind of in the background. I'll be open about my conviction here. Why I wanted to do this particular topic was I'm noticing more and more, and I'm so glad you put it in terms of like engagement and lack of downtime and everything. I'm noticing more and more that the storytelling games today, we're talking like an Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, or we're talking, Mansion Man, Fantasy Flight type stuff, but it doesn't have to be them, just other people. When you get storytelling, storytelling feels like a movie. Storytelling feels like a video game. It feels like I'm being kind of just having stuff thrown at me and, okay, immerse yourself in this, where in older school format, like, even a Dark Tower, say, or, a lot of these other games, they have downtime. And see, when I remember my plays of Dark Tower, I don't remember playing, like staring at the back of a tower. I remember kind of imagining, oh, okay, they're in this big vicious fight, and like, oh my God, these brigands are just falling left and right, blah, blah, blah. And like, I was able to fill a lot more of my imagination because I had that downtime. So I guess my overall question is, have we lost something? These improvements in mechanism, these streamlining the game experiences, in your opinion, Rob, have we lost a whole chunk of storytelling kind of experience for players at the table with modernizing mechanisms?
Well, I think there's correlation without causation, right? I don't think that storytelling mechanisms that go faster and lack of downtime have caused people to not be able to sit quietly with their thoughts. I think all of our cultural entertainment has encouraged us, myself included, not to just sit quietly and think about things. Like, I will sit there and go, how did I even take my phone out? What am I doing? I'm standing in a bank line. Then, I'm going up in 5 seconds. And I like, rather than just sit and look around and think about something, which I would have done like 10 years ago before I got hooked on phones and other things and entertained me, and before there was ads. I mean, there's always been billboards. I feel like there's more ads in more places. There's more shiny things for me to look at. Therefore, it's harder for me to just sit and go like, oh, it's quiet. I'm just going to sit quietly and enjoy imagining. And I think it's a habit that a lot of people have lost.
And so you don't place that in the game design space. You just more place it as like, okay, game designs are kind of downstream from what is happening in the overall culture.
Yeah, I really like my job, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to pay my bills with it, but I don't think that board games are ever a leading indicator of popular culture or that influential to society as a whole. But within the board game space, right, if you're playing 9 games that all have like low downtime, and that's just like how you get used to it, and then the 10th one sort of spaces things out a little bit, it's going to stand out, and you might be like, I don't like this. Why? And you might not be able to articulate it, or you might feel like you're bored. But that's one thing that I look at all the time when I'm playtesting is, does anyone take out their phone? And it's not that it's bad. Sometimes you got to take out your phone and look at something. Sometimes, you got a text, or it's the babysitter, or you got an email, and it's important. But when I notice people doing it, I look and think, okay, did they do this because they're not engaged in the game, right? They're not imagining, they're not thinking about their next turn. They did their turn, and they're waiting for their next turn. And for some reason, they don't feel like they need to pay attention or mentally participate until that happens. And then I sort of dig into that and be like, well, what's lacking here? Mechanically, narratively, what's not engaging them?
Where an older school design wouldn't ask that question, so to speak. Like, I think the emphasis was more on, how do I make a player's turn more exciting? How can I, throw in some dice in there, and how can I, jazz up the narrative there for that particular player's turn? And then for other people, it's like, okay, wait for your turn. Doesn't matter how long it takes. Is that kind of a correct approach? The distinction between the two kind of older designs and now?
Yeah, this is like a wonderful exam. I'm defending, it's like doing an oral defense of my thesis. I think it's a difference. I mean, you just can go take an older game, and I do this all the time, both being older and looking for games to restore, and you say, well, this is good. This is just not how games are made right now. And sometimes it's downtime, sometimes it's catch-up mechanisms, sometimes it's the decisions you're asked to make, sometimes it's the sort of framing of what you do on a turn. What game? I'm testing another game for restoration games right now, and you use dice to get by a challenge in the middle of the game, but you don't use them at the beginning, and everyone at the start of their turn like picks up the dice and goes, oh wait, I don't roll these at the start of my turn. Like, somewhere in the DNA, if you're of a certain age, you start of my turn, grab some dice, like from Monopoly, from what is the Parcheesi, like all of these games. At start of your turn, there's dice on the table, you grab them and you roll them, and that will inform what you can do on your turn. And it's interesting that some people will still do that. And there's these other DNA things. If you ask a kid right now, like in 2nd grade, to make a board game, they'll draw a path game that has like go to start and lose a turn and all these things. And I'm like, what game is this based on? There's no game that does this, but everyone instinctively like draws these things. So there's a whole bunch of assumptions of what a game is supposed to do and how it's supposed to play, and sometimes it's hard to get people past that.
It's Candyland, Rob. Candyland and Chutes and Ladders. It's ruined us all.
It might be. I can ardently defend both of those games for being very good games for what they're supposed to do. Well, Candyland more so than Chutes and Ladders. But
Not sure if we should go on that.
I will pick that hill and die on it if we want to go that way. But
Sure.
And speaking of assumptions, I do want to kind of push back a bit, Jason, and this is going to kind of give my sort of thesis for this discussion. But while I do totally agree, and you know, for me, I think it's a good thing as a game designer, I totally agree that mechanisms and mechanics have kind of become more modernized. I think that largely storytelling is very similar in games, both modern and back in the day. I don't feel like it's changed that much, and I think there's different reasons for this. First of all, I think there's still tons of games that come out with like big pages of text that you read to the entire table where choices are made. You have games like Legacy of Dragonhold that came out from Fantasy Flight. You have Escape the Dark Castle that we just played last night. You know, Madara has this ridiculously huge, complicated, in-depth like campaign book that you read multiple pages from before you play, and people are eating that up. Now, with modern things and the internet and everything, you can adapt to different play experiences. So like Madara has a sort of Cliff Notes version if your group just does not feel like that. And I won't argue that people's attention spans haven't decreased. The people who want to sit around listening to pages of a case book from Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, that might be less successful than it was back in the day. But I still think there's a lot of people who are fine with just sitting down and hearing a story be read, which I would say is very late 70s, early 80s game design. At least in terms of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've been putting these chapter books into games of mine of late. You know, I'm sort of like, sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this again? And I'm like, it's sometimes people just want to sit and hear a paragraph, and a lot of times they don't though. And you have to be careful that like there has to be a reason. If the paragraph is just flavor, people will say that, and flavor, get a gold.
Right. People had that complaint about, I think it was Near and Far or Above and Below, where it's like, okay, paragraph, what do I get? Paragraph, what do I get?
Yeah, and so either there has to be some reason why you care about the narrative there. It has to drive the plot forward. It has to give you a clue as to why you should pay attention. It has to give you a choice that's in there. Like or it has to be short. Right, it has to, or it somehow has to be interesting. I think there's a lot of times where people, or if it's none of those things, you just know that some people will skip out on it, and that has to be okay as well.
Well, I think it also depends on co-op versus competitive, because right now we have a bit of a D&D renaissance going on, and kind of RPGs in general, and an increased attention to them, and they're getting like more popular kind of popular coverage than they have in the past. Celebrities are coming out as like D&D players. It's been happening, but it's continuing to happen. So I think if you're playing a cooperative game, I know that with a lot of groups I play with, we'll play games where things are read and we all just kind of enjoy the reading experience together. Now, not every group is going to do that, but for the groups that I play with, that tends to work out that way. I do think it's a very different feeling, like in Near and Far, if it's a competitive thing and you are like actively trying to defeat each other. Then I totally agree with you. Have a choice. Have something important in there. Don't make it just flavor, because I can, it's sort of like your Dark Tower example. I can just tune out because the flavor doesn't affect me in any way. But if it's shared flavor, a shared story, I think it's a different thing. And again, I think so. Maybe old school storytelling lives more in cooperative than competitive gaming, but I see it a lot in a lot of games, and I certainly enjoy it in those games.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to Peter, because before the call we were talking about Escape the Dark Castle, and it's a really simple game, right? You're rolling dice, you're hitting targets, and then you move on with the story or something else happens. I wanted to get your idea of like, because that's a very, very old school thing, and yet you're like, I don't know why I enjoyed this. Maybe you could talk a little bit about like, from your perspective, you're kind of a little bit more mechanically inclined. That old school versus a more kind of streamlined, mechanically rich approach, and whether you think it kind of impacts the storytelling.
Well, for me, as with all things, I am planted firmly in the middle of all of you on this discussion. I feel like that's me in life. But Jason, I agree with you where, back in the day, you came up with your own story, but there are plenty of games that do that nowadays. Salvation Road, we intentionally don't tell a story because the story in the narrative is there. Like, as you're playing, you're doing things and you're like, oh, you can tell a story about how that thing happened. There are plenty of games that still do that nowadays. And I guess that's where my stance is. If you want any kind of game nowadays, you can get it. I mean, we just played 3 new games last night, and they were new within probably the last month or coming up in the next month. And they all played very differently and had very different takes on this. There are thousands of games coming out right now. So I don't know that. I mean, I get intellectually the challenge. And look, I was the first one to say when Mansions of Madness came out, I feel like I'm playing a movie. I feel like this is a little too directed. It's kind of pulling me through, and I'm making minor decisions throughout. Now, I've come to enjoy that over time. So, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of different ways to do it. And I think that's what makes gaming nowadays so great, is that whatever you're in the mood for, you can go to. Or if you just don't like certain things, you can avoid them like the plague. And you can go right toward the things you know that you're going to like. And then if you're an omni gamer like a lot of us nowadays, you can kind of go everywhere and kind of experiment. And, if I'm in this mood, this is what I'm going to play. And if I want to be directed down a path, then I can do that as well. So for me, I think we're in a golden age of gaming just because of this choice and variety we have out there.
Oh, I totally agree, and I think you hit on something which I say often, I just hadn't occurred to me in this call, but as a designer, am I going to tell you a story that's going, and I struggle with this with legacy games in particular, am I going to tell you a story and you're going to have minor influence on that story, but basically it's my story to tell, and if so, how do you feel like you are contributing to that story and it is your story because it's a game? Versus, I'm going to give you a whole delightful gift basket of character cliches and tropes and other things that, well, maybe not cliches, but we'll call them tropes and very obvious archetypes that you say, oh, I know how all these characters would interact. And then you sort of fill in the blanks and end up telling completely your own story. I feel like Betrayal at House on the Hill, which I did some design and development work on back on the original, does that exactly. Like, here is a whole pile of horror cliches, from cards to characters to rooms to haunts, and you write it.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm totally glad we're at that kind of distinction, and I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about is like old school gaming lent itself more to that. Here's a pile of stuff and let a story emerge from it, where I believe that more games now, I mean, I agree with you, Peter, you can get everything. I just feel like the really popular stuff and the really, the stuff that gets all the Kickstarter backers and stuff that gets all the press and attention. I think more of that is kind of on now I'm the designer is telling me a story.
Jason, I have a secret for you.
Yes, sir.
You want to know why they keep making games like that? Because they're the real popular stuff right now and everybody's buying it. The other games are being made, just nobody's talking about them. So, I mean, if, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. These games are popular, they're doing really well, so the ones you're hearing about are the ones that are in that vein.
I can still say we've lost something. I can still be the grognard shaking my fist at the.
But I mean, Jason, I can't agree with you at all, man, because all those types of games were back in the day too. Hero Quest was a completely self-contained story. Like, you would go into each mission, it would be the exact same way unless you busted out one of the expansion sets, and that's back in 1985, And then, but then I could also play Magic Realm and have this completely, this total experience of creating my own story and going where I want to go and having my hero have these encounters and put them together. And Talisman, that's another old one where, like, you were doing your own story. Arkham Horror. I think we still have all those exact same archetypes, and maybe one is kind of at its zenith. One is, they wax and wane in popularity. But no, I totally disagree that there were so many games that were like, here is the story we're going to tell you, that were not sort of that emergent storyline. I don't think that's an old versus new distinction at all.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'll go back to Rob. Well, I'm kind of posing it as a distinction. I mean, and obviously Michael wants to kind of mess that up. Do you distinguish kind of in that way the old versus the new in terms of storytelling, or is it more mechanism driven that you're thinking the old versus the new?
I don't think that's a modern distinction. I think telling a story, at least in Western culture, has, there's certain things that just have been there. And when, I'm hearing these games from the 80s, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a little of this and that's a little of that. Some games are, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to think. I don't think this is a modern thing. I think in general, speeding up downtime in a game is a modern thing. And some mechanisms, it's, like 30 years ago, you had 6-sided dice in a game, the end, and they went 1-6. And even though D&D had other ones, and now if you see dice, it doesn't mean you roll them at the beginning of your turn, and they're not necessarily 1-6. There's a lot more mechanisms conceptually in a lot different ways that we use materials in board games, and we're keen not to have too much downtime, and we're keen not to make a 4-hour game. But even sometimes people do make a longer game, and it does very well. I mean, one of the things I think is really interesting about Gloomhaven is it is a very, very good version of what I consider to be more of an 80s or 90s board game. Like, where you're like, it's very tactical, it's very thought out, you've got a lot of little things that you have to move around. And the thing that surprised me about Gloomhaven is not that people liked it, because it's very, very good at what it does. It's the number of people who ended up liking it. Because it seemed like when I played it, I'm like, oh, this is the type of game that will appeal to this group, but it won't have a wider audience. And then it had a huge audience. And I met people who I play Cards Against Humanity and Gloomhaven. And you're like, those are the two board games. I'm really into board games. I play those too. And I was like, what? Right? Mm-hmm. That it has gotten this interesting crossover appeal. But I look at it and I think there's a lot of stuff it does very new and very fresh, what I'm saying. But there's some stuff I look at and I say, oh, at its root, this is a game I might have played in 1985 with my friends. And it could have gone in a version of this could have gone in the Milton Bradley Game Master line with Axis and Allies and broadsides and boarding parties and stuff like that.
Oh, bring that one back, please, 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 please.
It's funny. Nostalgia is a funny thing.
I just want the ships with the little mini dudes on them.
Right. Oh man, speaking of which, I felt so bad. Someone came up to me at Origins and said, "Well, will you be able to play the original Dark Tower on yours?" And I said, "Well, no, that was competitive. Ours is cooperative, and if you played the original game, like some stuff hasn't held up, and there's legal rights." And he said, "Yeah, but that's the game I want, but so you need to have a retro version." And I'm like trying not to say we're not going to do it, but I'm trying to explain all the reasons why we're not going to do it. And he just was like, "Well, it won't be that hard. Just put this module in." And I think eventually I realized that he had the game, but his tower had broken, and they're like $400 to buy a new one. And he just wanted to play that. So if he could buy our game, it would be significant.
I love how non-designers say, it's not that hard. Just put this in.
Yeah, surely it would be a small matter too. Like those are the phrases that are like, oh, what? Don't say that.
I like to get back. So I think the old and the new thing, we kind of argue that back and forth. I don't know if that's going to get us too far. I wanted to get back to your thing about whether the designer is the one telling the story or whether the designer is providing a bunch of stuff. And, the story kind of emerges from the play. I think that's kind of the more central thing. So especially in terms of Pandemic Legacy Season 1, Season 2, which all of us have played. So Season 1 definitely felt like more of that I'm being told a story now, and it was super fun. I loved it, and I think we all kind of enjoyed that a lot. And then Season 2 seemed to go in a little bit more of a direction of, okay, here's some stuff. There was still kind of a coherent story, but the order in which you revealed it changed. So you might not discover something. You might discover in game 2. You might discover it in game 9. You didn't know, really. It depends on how you play the game. So maybe talk a little bit about like your mindset in terms of approaching Season 1 versus Season 2 in that way of the way you guys told the story there.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to do so. It's interesting. In Season 1, there's about 20 cards that tell the entire story. There's like one story card at the start of each month and maybe up to 8 that you can find in packages. Like that's it. That's the entire narrative. And the rest of it actually relies a lot on tropes. Oh, this is my character, and then you read it, and then you open up another character. You're like, oh, of course this has happened. We've all seen like the movies that would fill it in. So yes, I was telling you a story, and it was a bit controlled. But a lot of times I was giving you the outline of the story, and probably what you remember, you filled in a lot yourself, or a number of things. And part of the reason we gave people relationships with other characters was not for the powers, but you could say, like, you could bring in a new character and go, oh, that's my ex-wife. You know, like you've seen that summer blockbuster, and now you got to work together. And then you meet someone else, you give the hard-ass boss and stuff. You would basically pull stock characters from summer blockbusters and write them into your story, but think that we did it. And I think that's part of the appeal of it. And in season 2, we have 3 narrative paths. We have what's happening in the present, which is January, February, March. Then you find cards that are telling you what happened in the 70 years between season 1 and season 2, which are told out of order chronologically. So you start getting these tent poles and you fill in the gaps in between, but you don't have to. It's just, well, I encourage you to. But you can, and then you have cities that you can go and explore, which really give tertiary information that rounds out both of those other stories. But if you miss it, we made sure that you didn't not understand what was going on. And so depending on how much people search, which cities they search in which order, it's other data points that go in. So there are a lot more data points that go in there, and there is partial information. So we did try to mix it up and not say, okay, we're just going to tell you another story. Season 3, which Matt and I have largely wrapped design on, and now we're into the like production phase of it, takes a slightly different tack just to do something different. But I'll talk more about that in the months to come.
Yeah, I figured I wouldn't ask about that because I wasn't going to get too many answers on season 3. You guys,
yeah, I'm now saying that, which is, we pretty much wrapped up design, and now we're having questions with the publisher, like good sorts of questions. Since season 1 and season 2, Z-Man was bought by Asmodee, and there's this larger team, and we've got this great development team. It's like, why'd you write that? This doesn't make sense. And someone's like really asking a lot of questions about the writing and the story and the mechanisms, and it's this great pressure test that we're like, oh yes, let's do this. And so we're having these sort of development revisions, which has been very nice.
Mm-hmm. So just to drill down a little bit on like kind of season 1 versus season 2. So full disclosure, I really enjoyed season 1. It was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had in gaming. Season 2, I enjoyed. I'll definitely play it again, but it had a little bit more difficulty with it because of what you're saying before about how they were like these kind of multiple narrative strains. And I guess felt like the season 2 story wasn't as memorable because it was just so much. And the games were longer, and by the time you end, like your affection deck is like 100 cards big. You have this huge thing going on.
There's ways to get around that. Mm-hmm. But yes, no, we tried to do a dark middle chapter. We tried to do a messy sort of. I mean, in season 1, we say you're the hero. Like you walk out and you're like the Avengers. I'm a hero, I'm a medic, I'm a researcher, I'm on the front lines, and the government's putting you like right in the front of this great thing, and the world starts out all shiny and new, and the question is, how much can you keep it in that state before the end? What sacrifices are you willing to make to the environment and the world to achieve the greater good? In season 2, we tried to turn everything possible on its head, which is, you are an everyman, and I will spoil the prologue of season 2 talking here, which is, you live on these havens, which are these sort of floating areas out in the middle of the ocean away from a plague which has taken over the world. The world is ended, or basically it's like down to its last glimmers. The leaders of the havens and your security force left for an annual conference where they all get together and never came back. You don't even see most of the board. And in many cases, cubes on the board is good. Like we said, how can we reverse every expectation? So we really wanted you to feel like at the beginning, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not equipped to do this. Everyone who is equipped to do this is gone. And I can't even see the board to know where to start. Now, we made it a little hard, especially in the 4-player version, especially in the first act. But we did want mild despair, which isn't as comfortable a feeling as I'm Captain America. Mm-hmm. So, and also it's not as new and fresh. right? Season 1 came out, people are like, I've never seen anything like this. Season 2 comes out, and you say, yeah, it's a good follow-up, and that's just inevitable with sequels. I think Empire Strikes Back is better than Star Wars, but it's not as original and didn't make as much money and didn't win as many awards.
Mm-hmm.
So something I'll say about the Season 1 versus Season 2 experience that kind of goes to the storytelling question as a whole. And this, I think, might be a personal thing. I know not everyone is going to have the same reaction I did. But like you, Jason, I definitely enjoyed Season 1 more than Season 2. Although I think Season 2, I loved the theme more. I think the revelation of the map and that despair thing, like I thought all of that was a slam dunk, a home run. But again, personally, I wouldn't say this is necessarily applying to anybody else. I don't like when stories, I feel like they're trying to have it both ways. They're trying to have both a pre-canned narrative that you're being walked through and emergent narrative, unless they make it really clear that that's the case. And the example I always use for this as kind of the way that bothers me the most, and this is not Pandemic Season 2, is the Telltale games, like the Walking Dead Telltale game or the Wolf Among Us. I don't know if any of you have played any of those.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I played,
yeah.
Very lightly.
I was enthralled with those when I first played, but I'm the kind of person who wants to see the branching. Again, I'm a choose your own adventure kid. You know, I want to go back and see like what other things could have happened. And the way Telltale does it is that it hits you over the head with the idea that, and this is the part that bothers me, by the way. I don't mind that I'm going to get to the same end goal no matter what. Telltale hits you over the head with the idea that your choices matter and things will be different based on what you do, and it's a lie. Generally speaking, it is very much a lie because the end state is basically identical. They slightly have varied this, but in the majority of their games, the end state is entirely identical no matter what you do. All you do is make slight variations on like how you get there and what the dialogue is. And again, I don't mind that. I don't like that I feel I was like lied to. And I'm not saying, by the way, that Pandemic Season 2 lied to me, but I will say
we're the same thing, especially with Season 2, or both of them, which is you're going to be able to change, like do a mix of the song, like turn this up and turn this down and do it, but we're going to play a song for you. But we always assume that, hey, you just played like 15, 16 games of Pandemic, you're not going to play it again. And we know that people might look through well, what happens if we did this or did that? And like, oh, it's the same and it'll be disappointing. But we're mixing some stuff up a little in Season 3, but I totally get it. What you're describing is the questions that we ask ourselves, which is how do we give people choice without us as designers just saying, we have no idea what the board looks like now.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. Like, as a designer, I totally get it. Like, especially in a board game space, I think video games can do, like, the true choose-your-own-adventure thing more easily, but Telltale didn't want to. They wanted to have a stronger, like, cohesive narrative. But, yeah, like, if you don't, you know, and again, like, minor spoilers for Pandemic Legacy Season 2, but, like, if you don't know whether or not, like, this continent exists in the game state, it totally screws up what you can do with, like, scenario design. So I get that you need to have it there, but I will say, like, the first time that something was revealed by force, when I thought that I had the power to make it get revealed, and then, sorry, I'm trying to speak vaguely. And then,
I know like you're talking about continent reveal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that was something, that was like the least bad option, which is to just tell people the board is missing, and you're going to have to re-explore the world. So you have to find North America and South America, or what's left of these different places. But you know, Matt and I said, what happens if people never get to it?
Right.
And we said they won't be able to win. Right. So, like, at some point, we need to make them explored. And we tried narratively, and I get it didn't fully resonate with you to explain, like, there is another faction of, like, paramilitary people who are also combing through these places for their own purposes, and you're in a race with them. But yes, if you design games or something, you see right through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, like I'm of two minds. As a designer, there's no other way you can do it. As a gamer, it was very personally, I don't expect this to be for anybody else, it was a negative game experience for me, just in that aspect. It didn't, like, ruin Pandemic Legacy Season 2, but it made it less enjoyable narratively for me.
There was another way to go. I mean, you could have just released Pandemic Legacy Season 1A. You know, it could have been the same story, like The Hangover 2 is the same story as The Hangover 1. The same exact story. And The Hangover 3 changed some things, but not really. And you can kind of like release all three and everybody kind of goes home kind of happy, you know? Like maybe not super happy because I don't think you can ever make anybody super happy, but like you mentioned before, Rob, when you in the very beginning talk about assumptions and expectations. I think Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and just Legacy in general gives us the expectation that we can't break this. You know, whatever we do, it's gonna happen. And Pandemic Legacy Season 2 is almost like breakable in a sense, like because you're gonna, you know, if you go too far in one direction, you're not gonna discover the continent, you're not gonna get the resources you want, and you're just gonna lose 4 games because of the way the game unfolded. And I think, you know, I don't know if you kind of plan for that or if like people are upset with it and you're happy with that anyway, so to speak. As a designer.
The only thing, well, the thing is, this is where I said before is there's flavor text all over it, like kind of telling you like you should go do this,
yeah, absolutely,
do this thing, and it's hit like 3 times in like 3 months, and everyone like I've seen like people play it. I've walked by a convention or seen people, and they're like. So anyway, and they start reading, and it goes, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, how many cubes do we get? And everyone ignores it. And then later on, they're like, we had no idea we were supposed to do this. And so that's what I was talking about is like make sure that the narrative is doing something. So you have to pay attention. But yeah, I think that first act where we had to like guide people with narrative cards. And a lot of people, especially in a 4-player game, lost like both games in March and both games in April. And that's very demoralizing. And we didn't see it in playtesting. But it happened. And if I could go back, if they ever do like a, you know, director's recut in 5 or 6 or 8 years of all 3 games, and there's certainly little things I would tweak in all of them. I just don't know what they are in Season 3 yet because it hasn't come out.
Go ahead, Peter. You were saying something?
Well, yeah, and I mean, it kind of goes to the, you know, storytelling portion of it. And, you know, Rob, you mentioned something that I never even thought of with Pandemic Legacy Season 1, that you weren't getting story breaks typically. Now, ironically, in the first mission, you did get it midway through the campaign. But typically, you're playing a full mission without that story break. The story is told to you at the beginning, and then you get to play out that story. Whereas in Season 2, there were these little hints that were thrown in, but they were thrown in the middle of gameplay. So if you're so focused on the fixing the board, right, because everything's going to crazy, then you may miss those story beats because you're focused on the board. So it is interesting about interspersing narrative into your game. Some of that narrative may get lost, and I've wondered why when I play some games, I lose the narrative and I can't focus on it. And maybe it is that when too much is being given to me while I am trying to figure out this puzzle that is going on the board, maybe that's where story gets lost sometime.
Yeah, and we tried to avoid that, but sometimes it's unavoidable because like in Season 2, you will discover a continent or a region sometimes, and when the game is still going. I mean, if it's your last objective, it ends, and then you have to like open that box, and it's usually an exciting moment because it's a little Christmas present, and people stop and look at it, but you're integrating new rules. And you're okay, here's a new mechanism, and then these cubes go here, and you're putting it in the rule book, and you're very much processing. You're in your head, you're thinking, yeah, but we still have to get over there, and I need to give you that card. So we tried to minimize the amount of important narrative you would get in that moment, and really only do it at the front or the back. And in general, with these games, we try to give big things that you have to integrate happen either at the beginning of a game or an end, which you could say they're the exact same place. But if it's a new rule, we try to do it at the beginning of the game so you can use it right away in case it's 3 weeks before you play. If it's a new exciting narrative moment, we often do it at the end like a cliffhanger so you want to play the next game, even though they're largely the same place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I wasn't even talking about Pandemic Legacy when I talked about this. I wanted to, you know, get back kind of to the main topic, which is just narrative in games. And I do think it's interesting that if you try to give people too many heavy things to think about at the board and try to introduce narrative at the same time, something's going to get lost. Either you're going to miss out on a rule or you're going to miss out on some of the story. I think it is hard to focus on both simultaneously. And so I think that's why you get games like Mansions of Madness, where your actions that you are doing are very simple. Journeys in Middle-earth does the same thing, where you basically get 2 actions on your turn. You know, it's moving, it's fighting, it's trying to solve a puzzle, something like this. The narrative is very strong in there, though, and I remember a lot of those stories, and I remember what happened more because I'm not overly concerned with thinking about what's going on. Whereas other games where the gameplay is really heavy, you know, you talk about the Ryan Lockett games, they have very heavy narrative, but you're also doing these Eurogamey things, which you have to think about how I'm running my engine, doing this, doing that. And I think sometimes that's why you get pull one way or another. Some people remember the mechanics really well. Some people remember the story really well, but they may not even be living the same experience at the same time because of where that person's individual focus might be.
Yeah. That's the thing. When people say to me, like, oh, do you do narrative first or do you do mechanic first or what do you approach? And I say, I'm an experience designer. I want you to have an experience. I want the narrative and the story and the pieces and the typeface and the colors to all be an ingredient in that recipe, but you walk away with like something in a synthesized whole. And I will say that if I have like, I've done teaching and stuff, so sometimes I'll have interns and they're like, but this is, you know, I want to get them like a game is an experience that you play around a table with people and you all will walk away with slightly different pieces of it. And we need to focus on that more than some of the specifics. So I think what you're saying is, you know, just like spot on that everyone pulls a different thread out of it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's both things, right? Like if it's a kind of that more the designer is giving you narrative of the experience and you're kind of immersing in what the designer giving you, or if there's a bunch of pieces that you're just kind of like laying out, like, you know, toys in a sandbox and people just kind of like making it like it's true in both cases. Is that what you would say?
I don't think it's both cases. I think it's more of a continuum than we'd like to say. Sometimes you tell a story, sometimes you give pieces, sometimes it's a combination, sometimes mechanics, you know, like even within a game, it's really hard for me to put things in discrete buckets. It all just feels like it blends together like something that blends together.
Lovely simile there.
Yeah.
I guess we can thank you very much, by the way. You know, we're coming towards the end. We covered a lot of points that I wanted to cover. What are your personal I'll go to Rob first. What are your personal favorite games for telling stories? Like the things that inspire you, things you come back to all the time, and you know, what are some of those games?
First edition D&D, not because the system is that good. It's kind of a delightful hot mess, but because it got me into gaming and storytelling in general. I discovered it when I was 11. I discovered comic books around the same time and just fell in love with it. And I keep the first edition D&D books near my desk. And sometimes when I'm stuck, I'll pull them out because it will remind me. I'll read it. I'll see a picture of being 11 or 12 when I wasn't a game designer and I wasn't a middle-aged man, of what it felt like to just have that joy of like story or adventure or a world or playing a game. And once I can get into that headspace, it will inspire me to. Sometimes I'm too busy analyzing something and I need to loosen up and have more fun with it. I'm playing tight, so to speak. We'll do a sports analogy. And sometimes it's got to loosen up and have fun. So those that's my go-to. I did enjoy Ignacie's detective series a lot last year. I'm actually finishing up designing an expansion for it, which should be out. Oh. It might be out by the end of the year. I think so. So that's been fun. That is just literally writing like a crime, and then all the characters and all their motives, and then breaking it up and saying, okay, I have about 50 different cards and some computer stuff to give you all the pieces, but I'll never to give you most of them. I'll never give you all of them, and that's been fun. Although it takes 3 hours to play test, and after doing it 5 times now in 2 weeks, I'm a little tired of hearing this story. But it's good.
It's always hard to read your own narrative. It's like,
and then
I know it's coming.
People will get there and and then they're going to say this. Yeah, they said this, which is good. It means like the things I'm trying to communicate are coming through. But I always get excited now when someone goes down a really wrong path. Because I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this before. Let's see what happens.
Oh, man, that happened to us with the original detective in quite a major
it's
way.
So easy to do that.
What about you guys? Just like number one, I imagine you could do this on your own podcast, but since I have you, I mean, what are your absolute favorite like storytelling, board gaming, or kind of tabletop experiences?
My number one right now, this is Mike again, by the way. My number one is also my number one game currently, and that's Arkham Horror, the card game, the LCG from Fantasy Flight. This does several things. First of all, it's been a major inspiration for what we're doing with the narrative and campaign structure for one of our current designs that's should be revealed later this year and be available next year.
Cool.
And yeah, it's so Arkham Horror, the card game, it has great atmosphere. I really like the writing, like really nice narrative where they are generally telling a single story, but the emergent gameplay within it and like the way you can kind of explore and do different things and have different results within an adventure is really exciting. And then it also has my absolute favorite thing, and that is the failing forward idea of the campaign, where I will do badly, things will go poorly, I know it will mess me up for later on in the campaign. It actually has ramifications that matter. It's not like just lip service that it matters, kind of like the Telltale games. But at the same time, I'm going to get through a story. It'll just be my story. My story might be that I got beat up left and right until I was eventually eaten by a great old one, but that's still a fun ride. And comparing it to something like Gloomhaven, whose mechanical design I adore, but whose narrative I felt was kind of lacking. Anytime I had to replay a scenario in Gloomhaven and there was no shine to it anymore, and it was just the mechanical kind of nature of going through the exact same encounter and kind of gaming it so that I could win it the best way possible, that was not a fun experience. So yeah, Arkham Horror, the card game, it has been a big inspiration in current design for me, but also I think it's just a fabulous way to do a narrative that both tells a compelling story but also gives you buy-in and influence on that story.
What about you, Peter?
So Castles of Burgundy has a really neat story.
Oh, man. That time I rolled the green die and the other die, wow.
I really like the narrative.
I should not have asked this question to you.
About building my fiefdom. And
that's what see it's not gone, Jason. That's emergent gameplay right there. Peter,
Sure.
Peter knew what all the serfs working for him were doing, knew like what his mistress was doing while he was tending the fields, all that stuff.
Right.
No, I will say I am enjoying Journeys in Middle-earth. I am excited to see where the story goes going forward. I have enjoyed playing it, and I think, it's funny because Rob mentioned something about, just letting yourself loose and letting your hair down. It's really hard to do as a designer, especially when you're playing games almost for research. It's like, wow, what elements of this game do I like, and which ones do I want to take going forward? And it sometimes feels like you're always doing that, so to play a game that you're just enjoying and getting to play for the enjoyment of it sometimes becomes hard, for me at least anyway. And so Journeys in Middle-earth, because the mechanisms are pretty streamlined and you really don't have a lot of choices, I really enjoy the ride of that game, and I do feel like I am following the story more there than I am in a game where I'm having to make a million tactical choices as well at the same time, because then I do get lost in mechanics. So for me, Journeys in Middle-earth has been a really fun ride so far.
All right. So Rob, so Mike snuck in a little bit of promo for some upcoming games. You have a lot of stuff coming out, not just under the Restoration Games banner, but with collaborations and everything. So I'm looking at Machi Koro Legacy. I'm looking at Cthulhu Death May Die. Maybe you can give the people a little bit of a preview of what's coming up from you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me. I have a lot of stuff that's coming out.
Like a lot.
Yeah, it was weird. It was all supposed to be spaced out, and like a number of things got delayed, and then they're all like in 5 months, which is a very nice problem to have, but still a little like overwhelming at times. I have a game coming out from Calliope called Shipshape, which is like a tile logic stacking game, which like it has no narrative whatsoever, so I'll leave it to the side for this one. Machi Koro Legacy, which I think a lot of people still go, wait, what?
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued by that one. I gotta tell you.
It is for kids and casual gamers. It tells a very light sort of Japanese culture-inspired fairy tale, and it's deliberately whimsical. That's one of those times when I did sort of let my hair down and just write to be silly and tongue-in-cheek, right? This is not trying to make a larger statement. And it's 10 games long. I took it out to play with some people just to like see the final version, and everything came together, and they played 5 games in a row. or just like no, again, and then we had to stop for dinner. I mean, they probably wouldn't have done all 10, but it's something that you can play in a weekend, and then you just have your own version of Machikoro with a few of the rules in there.
Actually, I'm pausing on that just for a second because my problem with Machikoro is I wanted it to be light and fun and just go a lot quickly. The base game, however, had this issue, especially if you mixed in an expansion or two, where there was a lot of take that. Like you could literally like take a bunch of, you go and then you roll. Everybody else has red buildings, and they do the thing where they hold out your hand at you because you owe them money, and which is funny, I guess. But you realize, oh my god, I've been playing this game for 2.5 hours because everybody begins their turn with no money. So that it really kind of sunk the game for me, and I think part of that reaction was people remembering that experience of like, okay, this kind of broke the game for me. How are we going to make this legacy? So did you address that?
I got you covered 3 different ways on that.
Sweet.
Okay, one is a lot of people play Machikoro, the base game, wrong, where you pay out first and then you collect on your turn, not the other way around. So if you owe people like 6 and you're collecting 8, you ain't. Like if you owe people like, let's say 6 and you have no money, you say, sorry, can't pay you, then you collect your money. So I think a lot of people collect their money and then pay out, which is just makes it much worse. Also, a lot of people don't like the red cards. You add cards to this game. The base set has no red cards, and I will give a very mild spoiler. The new cards that come out are double-sided. One side is red and one side isn't, and whoever wins the game checks a box and decides whether you're playing on the take that red side or the other side. So it is very possible to have very few, if any, red cards in the game. We also made sure, I don't want to say every time, but as much as possible, if a red card, let's say, hit on the number 6, there was also a second card that would hit on 6. So if you had both of them and you rolled a 6, you would pay out, but then collect more. So, but mostly by just telling people, like, you don't want to play with red cards, you don't really have to. There's a couple twists and turns where you may get some briefly and here and there. But yeah, no, you could decide as a group, I don't like these take that cards. I want it to be like just this engine building game, so we're not going to put them in. And then that would be fine. The 5 games we played, someone put in 2 red cards and 3 people didn't. So you ended up with just this little light little bit. And we don't put many of them in. There's only like 4 or 5. So it's not like someone will have like 9 of them.
And Jason, just threaten the person in your group who always wants to put the red cards in. Say, we are going to take you down every game and make sure you don't win, so you're not putting any more red cards in this game.
Because games are all about companionship and fun.
That's right.
And intimidation.
All right, you got some more stuff coming out. The one I'm looking forward to really is Cthulhu Death May Die, just because of the pedigree, Simon and Eric Lang and all that. Is that coming anytime soon?
That is coming soon. I think like when there was this tariff threat, it might be delayed, or maybe it is delayed anyway because they're trying to get around it, and then the tariffs got reversed, but the delays still happen. That will be, I think, around at Gen Con, but maybe full retail at Essen, because it has to go to the Kickstarter backers first. That is, that's got a whole bunch of scenarios, or episodes, we call them. Eric and I wrote it like we were doing a canceled 1990s TV show.
Nice.
And so we call them episodes. And then there's even a couple lost episodes, like the stuff on the cutting room floor, which are deliberately like, why would you put this in? Like there's one where aliens are invading Maine and your investigator's trying to stop it. And the only way you can stop it is to strap dynamite to Moose and then have the aliens pull them up into their ship and then blow it up. Right? And it's the type of thing where you go, well, that's not that good. And you're like, yeah, it's a lost episode. So these ended up on the cutting room floor for various reasons. And there's a
Waiting
different
to be slapped on a promo.
Yeah, there's a different lost episode, which is an evil ice cream truck is going around like a 1950s type town selling things. It's the X-Files like monster of the week.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
You're like, this isn't that good. But then there's a season, like there's like a season 1 and season 2, and each one has 6 episodes, and those episodes are a little more straightforward, other than the fact that we turned it on its head and say, you're going to try to kill this elder being, as you're going to give it an Achilles heel for a split second, so when it enters our world, you can kill it. It is not an easy game to win. I think it'll have a high death rate, being a Cthulhu game, and just
an Eric Lang game.
And an Eric Lang game.
I hate to admit this. I got so distracted by this game and the giant Cthulhu miniature. That's all I paid attention to. I didn't even realize this was a co-op game. So,
Yeah.
I hope I get a chance to play it at some point. Because
the giant Cthulhu was sort of stole a lot of interesting focus. If you go on Board Game Geek right now, this has a perfect anti-bell curve. It has a whole bunch of people gave it a 1 because of the Kickstarter or something about the Kickstarter they didn't like, and then a whole bunch of people gave it a 10 to cancel out the 1s.
Oh, jeez.
And there's like nothing in between.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that was Rob Daviau. Thank you very much for spending so much time with us.
So, well, thank you for having me here.
And this was Peter and Mike from Co-opcast. Thank you guys so much for lending a little bit of perspective. I'm over here giving my grognardy, half-drunken insights into gaming, and you guys have set me straight. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad that you could be half drunken at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Good job.
Wow. Yeah.
That's just how Jason rolls, man.
Yeah, it's a little concerning, I guess.
Actually, I haven't had a drink in 5 years. I'm just talking about my insights.
Oh, okay.
Worthy of that.
Yeah, no, so thanks for having us on, Jason. And yeah, it is One-Stop Co-op Shop now. The Co-op Cast name has gone away. We just kept the same branding for the YouTube channel and the podcast.
Yeah, and thanks for having us. We love coming on, and we love when you're on our show, too. So we love these cross episodes where we get lots of people who like to talk in the same space.
Absolutely.
And hey, for those who don't know, Jason is our official pandemic correspondent. So now that we know season 3 is coming, I'm sure we'll have you on for it whenever that happens.
Oh, Pandemic's my favorite game, Rob. Is my absolute favorite game. Pandemic, like season 1 was a 10. Season 2, I think I ended at a 9. I wanted it to be a 10. I have to play it again, which means I have to get a group together again. And
I'll take a 9. I'll take it
sure.
Any day.
I cannot wait for season 3. I really can.
So, well, thank you very much. And thank you all.
All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Every Night is Game Night. Once again, thanks to Rob and Peter and Mike for joining me. Thank you to everybody in the audience who has listened. This was episode 149. 150 is just around the corner. Let's celebrate those round numbers. We have 10 fingers, 10 toes, so every time one of them big round numbers on the Dewey Decimal System comes around, we're going to celebrate. We're going to have a good time. So I'm looking forward to the next episode. It'll just be me, and I'm going to change up like a little tweak. I'm really looking forward to hearing back from everybody to see if you guys like the little tweak that I'm going to introduce or try to introduce. I'm always trying to kind of mix things up a little bit. So if you like what you heard and if you want to participate in the conversation, ENGN_podcast on the Twitter, Every Night is Game Night Facebook group, everynightisgamenight.com. Pope Sixtus is my username over on BGG. Please send me a geek mail or subscribe to the geek list. I have a couple of geek lists, actually. One geek list on the episodes that I'm going to try to keep up. Sometimes I get behind on the geek list, but what are you going to do? I also have a big geek list of cooperative games, over 200 at this point, rated, commented. So if you just want like a nice little clearinghouse of lots and lots of co-op games, and go ahead and check that one out. All right, onwards and upwards. Episode 150 is next week. Until then, as Anthony would say, go ahead and grab a game off of that shelf and let's make every night a game night.